the amount of hair holding the extension hair matters. The amount, the sheer number of hairs. And it's not necessarily the number of hairs. If their hair is fine and thin, it takes more hairs. I guess it is the number of hairs, but it has to do with how big each hair is, right? So thick, coarse hair, if the hair that the person's getting extensions is more coarse than the extensions you're putting in, then 30 of the client's hairs might be able to support 50 of the extension client's hairs. But then you get to this fine, thin client where she's going through, usually thinner clients are going through the shedding process faster. Also, a finer, thinner, weaker root, the hair's getting squeezed off and made thinner for other hair loss challenges and problems and reasons we're not going to talk about today. But that particular client has smaller hairs. It might take 70 or 80 of her hair strands, which might actually need to come from a little bit bigger section. And you might have to sacrifice a little bit of pulling hair off of where natural fall is to get a bond in. You have to slightly risk that while you're risking a little more hair in the section. And I even have a trick for that. You don't have to go as wide. You have to go deeper. And when you go deeper and you stay at natural fall, I know I'm talking about my hands. I hope it's helping. But when you're going deeper and you go into natural fall, you got to be a little further away from the head for that bond to stay in, because you got to be a certain distance under the bottom part of that section. Because as you get above the bottom part of the section, that's when the strand starts to lift up.
That's what we were just showing earlier, right, in the little, yeah.
So I need more hairs, like 70 hairs, to support these 50 hair piece of extension that I'm putting in.
I think people don't consider the shedding part. So they think if I only take 3 strands of hair, and that's going to be better because I'm not taking so much of their natural hair. But then if 2 of those strands naturally shed, as hair will do every day, which we have no control, just because the hair is attached to the bond or to the extension or to the weft or to the whatever, doesn't mean that hair is going to stay in that head. So all of a sudden, those 3 strands now becomes 1 or 2. Yeah, that's going to add some stress.
I said people go through the shedding process, but I wasn't clear. Like, you have to take a lot of these into consideration: the age of the client, the size of each hair, the amount of hairs per square inch. And what I found, and none of this is 100%, which makes it even more difficult, but for the most part, the thinner and finer a person's hair is, tend to go through the shedding process faster, right? So even if they have all the hairs per square inch on their head, if the average hair person shedding, God, the books say all kind of things, but let's just say 50 hairs a day. If the average person shedding 50 a day, that's why I call it an average, because Bernard was shedding 0 hairs a day. And so what I started to find was that if a person had finer, thinner hair and they complained about shedding and they had a bunch of different lengths in their hair as they were growing it out to here, and then they want extensions to thicken it or lengthen it, I would say, you know what? Not only do I need, let's just assume a hair extension is about 50 strands in there. I think it's actually a little bit more, but let's just say it's 50 strands. And I just got this chunk of extensions. I got to get a chunk of the client's hair, and it's really got to feel about the same is the starting point, right? So if it's thick, coarse hair, like I was saying before, 40 strands might support 50, but 40 in a little ponytail might actually feel like the 50 because one is a little bigger hair than the other, right? But then if you go to fine, thin hair, it might take, like I was saying earlier, 70 strands to feel the same thickness as those 50 hairs of extensions. But the other thing that you just brought up was a good point. We also need that 70 or 80 because over the extensions stay in a little while, right? 2-3 months. Over that time, most people are shedding hair, but this finer, thinner hair client is shedding more hair, more hair per day. And so out of those 70 hairs, how many hairs are still going to be there holding that extension in 2 or 3 months? So the other side of it is be a good counselor to your client. And you can say most people can go 3 or 4 months with extensions, but with your finer, thinner hair, you're going through the shedding process a little faster. Your hair's a little more fragile. I'd like to evaluate your hair and get a good look at you each month if I'm not doing your color or highlight. And you may only be able to go 2.5 months with your extensions instead of the 3 or 4. Be nice to your client and her hair and make the right recommendation. But because you grabbed more hairs and you're holding on to more hairs, so they might get down to 40 hairs at 3 months. They might be able to go 3 months if you were smart enough to put more hair in the section to support it longer.